Good morning. As promised, I'm going to do a summer update here. It's, I guess, late summer, early August. We're going to look at the projects that we looked at before in earlier update project videos and see how they're doing. Maybe taste some apples and see whatever else is going on that we can get into. This is my French prune plum. I like the European plums typically better. They're more versatile. The Japanese types, like the big juicy types with the kind of like sour pit when you get to the pit, they can be really good eating, but overall I kind of favor these. These dry really well. They're good for canning and cooking with and stuff like that. This particular variety doesn't get a lot bigger than this, but it's really sweet and very tasty. And it's very tasty when it's dried. It tastes like red licorice, like the red vines licorice. I've been cutting down some trees here and just starting to limb up this tree, which is dying. I think I'm going to leave it for this year because it has a pretty good acorn crop. The animals will have all these acorns to eat this year. Look at the crop on there. You know, this tree is sick and it knows it, and what trees will often do is when they're sick like this is try to produce a bumper crop of acorns, because this is the last gasp for them to, you know, reproduce and pass on their genes. And you can see here all this bleeding and these red stains. Look at that. That's crazy. That's just a big dead area right there that's infected with these ulcers, and once the ulcers connect all the way around the tree, which this is very close. Look, all this is dead right here, all the way over there. Then the tree will die rapidly. So I was just out here, you know, a couple days in the evening hacking on this with my axe just to get some axe time in. I'm hoping it'll make it till next spring and that I'll still be able to drop it next spring and peel it. It's a fairly good sized tree. There's a lot of good bark. I did a big scramble to try to get my firewood scene together late. It was like mid-July. I'd like to have everything cut by June 1st, and it was like early mid-July. Just did a big scramble. Got the chainsaw going, cut a bunch of, and split a bunch of firewood so it would be seasoning in the sun. I just left it all out here. So this whole area is changing so much because I'm having to take out all these big, huge tan oaks. Like, look at this big, beautiful tan oak. That's going to be gone soon. This whole area is changing, and I have to decide what to do out in this, you know, all these areas where the tan oaks used to be, which probably is going to be chestnut. I think I might put some chestnuts in. Anyway, I think I have enough firewood cut. Here's the pear tree I was training up in another video on training fruit trees, and it basically looks really happy, really dark green, very lush. The stem is thickening up a lot, but the shoots stopped growing, and they stopped growing quite a while ago. It's not because the tree doesn't have water or food, because I've watered it, I've fertilized it even more, and I think it really had enough. Basically what I'm saying is the tree has the resources to grow, but these shoots, you know, the ones that I want to grow, the main leaders, the ones I notched, stopped growing. So what I tried to do this time around, instead of re-notching it, which I may still do, just as an experiment, is I cut two of them back. This one right here, I just cut the tip off, you know, hopefully stimulate this to grow, because this is strictly hormonal. Again, the tree has the resources to grow, but for some reason, and maybe this is, you know, the tree has some sort of wisdom or kind of environmental intelligence that it knows that it should just not try to grow right now. I'm assuming that it just sort of got stuck in this mode where, you know, maybe it got low enough on water, maybe it has to do with day length, maybe it's a combination of factors. It just decided I'm done growing long this year, and we're just going to, you know, concentrate on gathering sunlight, gathering carbohydrate, growing a root system, growing bigger stems, and all that stuff. But what I want out of this tree is I want the stem to thicken more and just keep doing that. And I want these 4 shoots that I picked, the ones that are marked with clothespins. You'll have to watch the video to understand what I'm really talking about here. And I want those to keep growing, just those 4. And the rest of these, I'd be perfectly happy. In fact, I want them to stay, you know, the length that they are. So watering and fertilizing alone didn't work. And the next step was to tip. I tipped 2 of these back as control and left the other 2 as controls to see if that will stimulate the remaining ones to grow. I haven't unwrapped this one where I cracked the stem of that and rewrapped it with a splint. There's really no reason for me to unwrap that. As long as it's not constricting and choking the tree, it should be fine. And I think what I'll do next is, if these don't start growing within about a week, definitely within 2 weeks, I'll still probably try to force growth on these 4 shoots by notching them. Now the top, I really don't care. I'm perfectly happy if the top stops right there. It doesn't matter to me whether it grows or doesn't, but I do want these 4 to grow out more if possible. And if they don't, it's really not a big deal. They'll grow next year, especially after I cut off everything else, and it's just going to be those 4 branches and then a couple things at the top there. That apple right there fell off in the last 20 minutes. This is Carrie Pippin. Can you see right there? You see that ridge right there? It's like a sharp line, raised line on the apple. That's real distinctive with Carrie Pippin. So is this kind of like cavity. The stem cavity will have these protrusions into it, and sometimes they're folded over like a big lump. Like, look right in here. Can you see how weird? They're like a weird belly button. This is my early Franken tree, so it has all early apples. There's Carrie Pippin. These are chestnut crab, which are pollinated with various things. Trailman, Corpendu Plat, St. Edmund's Pippin, Wickson. Okay, I'm also testing fruit bags, and so far I like this one the best. It's a large bag with a twisty tie on it. The unfortunate thing is that it's already breaking down in the sun. We're not even through the summer and it's already breaking down. So bad review on that one. I tried 2 types of paper bags, this other type of mesh bag. I don't really like any of them. I like this one, but it turns out that it's decaying. And then this one I have a problem, it's just too small. You can see how this apple is actually elongated. Well, that's because it can't expand in this mesh bag. At the top here we have Williams Pride, and it's been ripening gradually. About every day and a half there's a new apple on the ground. But if I just shake this lightly, probably one of them, like the ripest one, will fall off. And there you go. You can see this bag is also a little bit small. It's actually, stretching and constricting the apple. This is a large apple, but this isn't really a large specimen. It kind of looks like if I had got the apple further down, but this is like a bag that you would get a cookie or a pretzel in or something like that. Probably pretty ripe specimen of Williams Pride. It smells very good. It's real fragrant. And well, let's taste it. There's probably, this will probably improve with a couple days sitting on the counter. All right, here we go. This apple just continues to impress. It's a very good apple at any season, not just for an early apple. It's actually sweet. Again, for an early apple, that's unusual. The flavor is excellent. There's a lot of flavor. It can be fairly complex. It varies anywhere from having interesting fruit flavors to being like eating cider, like a concentrated type of apple cider flavor. It's beautiful, large, it's disease resistant. Marks against it, the skin is fairly thick. I mean, if you want to get picky and complain about that. It's supposed to be resistant to fire blight, but I actually had it appear to be fairly susceptible to what I think was blossom fire blight. What I had one year that was attacking all the blossoms and fruiting spurs, and it was one of the most susceptible. So I don't know what's up with that. Scab, it hardly gets scab at all. The early drops that are like, kind of maybe not perfectly ripe are still good, which is not true of all early apples or all apples in general. Some apples are just really not any good. They're starchy, they're sharp, they're, harsh until they just hit that point where they're ripe. But this is not one of those apples. It's a little bit, longer season. For an early apple, again, it keeps well. Relatively speaking, like you can keep it in the fridge or ripen it on the counter a little bit. If you want an early apple, this is the top of the list to me because of all those attributes combined, but I would add, chestnut crab as far as eating is as good or better. Now, as far as I know, this has never been a commercial success, but for a market apple, if you could bring, crates of these to a market, like a farmer's market this season, in this quality, looking this good, like they get much bigger than this, they polish up really beautifully. Man, it sure seems like you'd be able to sell a lot of these. As far as like which apples I would plant if I wanted to start, a few acres of apples to sell, locally, this would be high on the list. I'm going to finish eating this apple and then we'll get back to work here. Well, here we are at Franken tree, and just look at that. Wow. It's a real bad scab year, so we're going to be looking at some very scabby apples and the difference between trees where we have a really heavy scab like this one, which is Pomo Sinel. They're pretty bad, and I've thinned off a lot of the worst fruit already, but I'm keeping a lot of fruit too because there's whole branches here that are pollinated with other things for breeding. There's whole strings of apples, like everything from here down, like all these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 apples. These are all pollinated more. There's like 12 or 13. These are all pollinated with, drum roll please, my seedling, Appaloosa, which is a red flesh crossed with Lady Williams, a very late apple. So trying to breed more super late hanging apples, and Pomo Sinel's one of the latest. I've been trying to water my fruit trees better this year, and I've done pretty good, I have to say. That could mean that they'll do better. It could mean that the trees will bear, more likely to bear again next year, or the apples may taste a little less rich and more watery. I could still stand to do a little more thinning here. Over the summer, I've been walking out here and thinning out more scab-infected fruits, fruits with bugs, things that the birds attack. And, you know, as you can see, I still have an extremely heavy load. Like these branches are maybe a little bit overloaded. Get rid of some scabby apples here. There's a beauty. So this is what scab's like when it's really bad. Now, some varieties will get scab bad, but they produce so many apples that you can thin out the scabby ones and still end up with a good crop. Even of unblemished apples, sometimes it just depends on how bad they are and how many apples there are to choose from. I completely missed this branch here. There's just a lot to keep up with. I was doing pretty good on the apples, you know, thinning and taking care of them and stuff, and then I just had to, at some point you have to quit, you know, and do something else. This one here, you can see the stuff coming out there, the frass, that's infected with a grub in there from the moth. I always cruise for those and try to pick them before, you know, as early as possible, because if they are on there too long, the grubs can mature and reproduce. That's part of control, is just picking the infected apples off. Here's another apple that's ripe right now, which is a it's labeled as Schaefer. It's a little red crab apple. As you can see here, it looks very pretty, little gem of an apple, but it's soft and mushy and no good. It's basically chicken food. Blech. Some tree paint tests going. I didn't actually finish all of my tree paint tests. Hopefully I'll still get a few more done this year. I'm trying to set up these tests to see which formulas last the best and are the most effective, etc. I was taking pictures of this cactus flower, and there's the tiny cactus it's attached to. I took some pictures. I got some footage of me pollinating it. Anyway, I think I got some great pictures. I'll insert them right here. I mean, really interested in cactus. I don't have much yet, but I'm into it. I really want some Peruvian apple cactus. That's high on my list. Should have some nectarine soon. This is Stribling's White up here, which is the variety that I grafted that we're going to go look at in a second. And it's looking really good. It did really good with the peach leaf curl. So if you want to try a good nectarine that's leaf curl resistant and good in a lot of other ways, including flavor, try Stribling's White Free. This tree also has some other nectarines grafted onto it. The tree's not doing well and it's going to get replaced, but for now it has offered a way to test out some different varieties, of which Stribling's White is the winner, just like Mark Albert said it would be. Okay, so here is the Stribling's White nectarine that I grafted onto a bitter almond rootstock. So story was, I planted some bitter almond rootstocks on this big charcoal pit, grew a stalk, and in the first year of its growth, I chip grafted a Stribling's White bud. In a week and a half or so, I cut it off. I think it was about 10 days or so. I cut that off, and then it grew up and didn't grow much the first year. In fact, it was only maybe 2 inches long. It looked pretty pathetic, but look at it now. This is a tree which in the first year, instead of growing just a single stem like most apples and pears will tend to do, it will feather out heavily, so it'll send off lots and lots of side shoots. So what I've been doing all season is taking off all the side shoots that I don't want And say, for instance, this one right here is one that I left. And what that does is it drives way more growth into these ones that are left. Look how fat that thing is. So that's going to be one of the main branches right here. Here's another one. And then I just recently selected this one up here. Hopefully you can see that one right there as the third one. And the way this thing's growing, I may get that fourth one out of here. So for instance, now that I have this one going that way, I'm going to take out this because it was pointing in the same direction. And what I'm probably going to end up choosing is that one right there, right here. If it grows enough this year. If it doesn't, no problem. I will just, you know, make that grow next year by notching and whatever other means. So I wrote Tim Springston, YouTube Oxbow Farms, and asked him to send me some corn seed because I know he's interested in corn and breeding corn and flower corns and, you know, interesting heirloom corns and corn development. So he sent me 3 different things, and I planted them here on this pit to try to get a little, you know, just experimental corn crop this year. I put wire cages around them, but the chickens basically attacked everything. So without actually fencing this whole thing in or finding a bunch of wire cages that are tall enough, it's pretty hopeless. So you can see the difference in this one that had a tall cage and the chickens didn't get it at all versus everything else is just, you know, totally hammered. Here's a pepper plant that I planted in straight charcoal, so there's no soil in there. You can see I put a little bell on here so I can hear the deer eating it in the middle of the night if they get on it, which they probably will eventually. They start getting braver and more intrusive as the summer goes on and things dry up out in the woods there. Anyway, it's doing great. It's lush green. It took a while for it to get reestablished after I washed all the dirt off the roots, and then the chickens ate almost all of the leaves. It was like they really hit it hard. But now it looks really, really beautiful. Anytime I walk anywhere near the garden, the chickens are like waiting for me to open them one of these buckets. And I'll look through them and see what looks good. And if they're lucky, they'll get a good one. That one looks okay. It's not good enough for you? The black and white one's the boss. I'm sure the rooster thinks he's the boss, but I'm pretty sure the black and white hen is the boss. She's definitely the boss of the red one. Here's a great example of a great apple that gets scab really bad, and that is pink parfait. Even though I've tried to favor picking off the scabby ones and leaving the good ones, you can see there's some really bad scab here. The only reason this apple's still on is because I pollinated it with Appaloosa. So that's really unfortunate about this variety. One of the reasons red-fleshed apples need development is a lot of them are actually pretty susceptible to scab, at least the whole Eder group. You know, I know that they're not all susceptible to scab, and I'm going to show you one that has 0 scab. However, I think it's a pretty primitive crab type. It's not, you know, these more refined Eder dessert type apples, or at least they're tending towards that. I mean, pink parfait is definitely an outstanding dessert apple. But all the Eders I've tested so far are pretty scab prone. Here's another one, Rubaiyat. Rubaiyat's probably even worse than pink parfait. Now here's the tree that we grafted over in the Making a Franken Tree video. I pretty much cut everything off this tree and regrafted it. And most of it's doing pretty good. Some of it's just kind of stalling. I lost a few grafts. Like this is an interesting one here where you'll get these grafts that take, but then they don't grow and then they just really slowly die. It's really odd. It just seems like that shouldn't happen, but I'm thinking that it could be incompatibility. There's just some kind of genetic incompatibility and the graft will fail, just like you get a organ transplant like in a human and it just gets rejected for some reason. Now this branch in particular just hasn't done as well either. This one shoot that's doing really well is actually off the main branch. And if you let these grow, the tree will tend to favor growth into that instead of into the grafts. The reason I left this is because I want it to replace that if this dies out completely, which it looks like, that's pretty much a loss right there. But the other branches on here haven't grown a lot, but they're still, healthy looking. They just haven't really pushed. So hopefully those will push next year. Overall, I would like to get more growth out of this tree this year. You can see some of them have put on, 1.5 feet, close to 2 feet. These actually are the 2 that died that were super old grafts, super old scion wood, and I let these grow, which are on the main original tree, so the tree is really favoring those and pushing them super hard. So there's 2 of those, and these I will graft next year to new stuff. Here's the Goldrush tree, looks beautiful. I mean, this is what these little interstem dwarfs look like if they're happy. if anything, I left too much fruit on this as well, although I've been kind of going through and thinning it off with stuff like this that is, you know, infected with bugs. You can see the frass right there, that stuff on the end. Here's another one right here. It's got bug. See, and I just miss stuff like this. I haven't been out here enough catching up on thinning. So it'd be good if I spent 5 minutes out here on this tree, just kind of. So one year I got a bunch of grapes from a local vineyard and made some port that was actually really, really good. And I threw the seeds out apparently out here, and they grew about 3 different ones. You can see there's some on the ground over there. And there's this one, but this one's actually making some fruit this year. So this will be like a seeded wine grape. I can't remember the variety. It was an Italian variety. So here, again, here's a beautiful, well-formed dwarf interstem apple tree, Sweet 16. It's got lots of nice fruit on it. It's got a nice open structure so light can get in there. If anything, I'd like to fill that structure in a little more. Part of the reason it's not filled in better is because I had regrafted this whole tree at some point. Whereas the Goldrush, say, for instance, right there, you can see it's a little more filled in. Although some people would say that's maybe a little bit too filled in. I think it's fine. That was not overgrafted again, so that's growing, you know, from the base it's growing Goldrush, whereas this one I had the scaffold branches already in place and I completely replaced those. But anyway, it looks great, and this is what these should look like if everything goes well. So this one right here was a pretty dwarfish crabapple variety called Muscat Divinus, which is this right here, that one branch. And you can see how it dwarfed the rest of the tree because the original variety already on an interstem, which is dwarfing, and then it has this whole dwarf tree. And even though I grafted like a larger, more vigorous variety onto it, which is Catherine, it dwarfed all the Catherine out. And it also changed the growth habit. See how this original branch grows and kind of droops down? Well, the Catherine's doing that too. See, it kind of goes out and it's got this weak drooping growth. So the stock does affect how the tree grows. So the experiments I did grafting on these scions of some of my seedlings onto this interstem tree to try to get them to produce sooner are interesting. Here's one right here that I grafted at the base, and then I arced it over and I grafted it in again right here. And it looks like that could end up being a fruit bud this year. That would not surprise me. See how it's kind of fat and short? I mean, probably not this year. But, you know, who knows? Maybe it'll work. Seems kind of pretty iffy. Here's another one. Again, I grafted it at the base, and then I grafted it again at the tip, and you can see it is growing a little short thingy right there. So, you know, since this is all experimental, I don't really know what I'm doing with this. It's just a big experiment. But I'm going to leave this fruiting bud right here. And the idea is that the graft, which is attached right here, will adopt the hormonal profile of this branch, which is fruiting. You know, it's small, it's not growing vegetative growth. It's just sitting here with this little spur making fruit over and over again, you know, year after year is the idea. So if it decides to grow any kind of like long shoots or anything, I won't encourage that. I'm just going to encourage it to do this right here. Now, if this starts fruiting, I'm going to cut this off and all the way back here. And I'm just going to have this one, you know, stick growing out and fruiting. But once the scion that I put on here makes that switch and it adopts that hormonal fingerprint of being a fruiting branch and it actually is producing fruit, this is no longer serving any purpose. But if this starts to grow out and grow like a long shoot or something, I won't let it do that. I'll just keep it to a single spur, which hopefully will be enough to make that do its thing. Lots of Wickson this year, not particularly big. If you let them grow like this and just produce tons of fruit, they don't get very big. You have to thin them a little bit more. And here's the branch that I pollinated with the apple medley. So this one I bagged this whole branch up so bugs couldn't get in there and pollinate it. And then I took like mixed pollen, and I used 2 different medleys on here, the red flesh medley and the other just regular mix. And I would just take that bag off and then put pollen on all the blossoms and then cover it back up. And I think I only did that 2 or 3 times actually. I had intended to do it more. Yeah, and look at this. That was the top of the tree that was standing straight up, and now it's just bent over. Hopefully it won't actually break. So I got a few early apples out of this row this year. This one is called, let's see if we can find a ripe specimen here. This is Carolina Red June. I've noticed that it just kind of goes soft too fast. Like by the time it's really actually getting ripe, it goes soft. I'd say this is about as good as they get in terms of a combination of flavor, texture, and richness. It's still not a rich apple. It's pretty watery and thin tasting. It does have an interesting, peculiar flavor, which is kind of what the old literature says. But, you know, it may not be happy here, and I didn't water these trees early. Maybe a week ago, finally got the water system running on this row and watered it. So with better care, you know, in a different climate, they might be interesting to try. They have a really high reputation. Another interesting thing is that they have a little bit of red flesh in there when they're really ripe. So without a better apple available, I would say worth eating. It might be worth experimenting with, especially if you live in the South, like given its reputation. But here I can't really get excited about it. I would kind of like to see what it does if it's cared for better, but I don't think it's going to improve much. My mom just sent me an article that said that there's more beneficial bacteria in the core of apples, more than is on the skin and in the flesh and stuff. The seeds are also allegedly cancer preventative because of the cyanide compounds in them. This year Bite Me got scab really bad, and this has been true in the past too. So Bite Me is definitely on the high scab susceptibility list. I picked off tons and tons of really badly infected apples like this one right here. I'm left with actually a decent crop of apples, even though a lot of them, most of them have some scab on them, almost all of them, but there's still a lot of good apples on the tree. But it's really too bad that it turned out to be so susceptible to scab. Before being too discouraged, it's good to remember that there are a lot of really great apples that I grow and am enthusiastic about and talk about all the time that get scab this bad or nearly as bad. And one of those I'll show you in a minute, which is Lady Williams. The fact that this tree is so productive, it seems like when it has an on year, it really sets a lot of fruit, and it always has been that way. It'll take years off and then it'll produce tons of fruit. It's still possible to get a decent crop by just picking off all the worst scabby apples and leaving the best ones. But you're not going to get an unblemished crop unless you treat somehow. And I don't spray. People ask me, what do you spray? How do you treat your apples? I don't spray anything with anything, organic or otherwise. If the fruit can't make it here on its own, I'm going to look for a different variety. So a project I'm hoping to get to this year actually is doing a scab survey and going around and looking at the trees and saying, you know, what's getting scab bad, and try to like rate them maybe 1 through 5 for scab susceptibility, because that's really valuable information, and I have a lot of, you know, varieties here to compare. For instance, on this tree, I just picked off some really horribly infected scab apples off of Mere Pippin, which is the base tree. And then this is Seatown Red, which is a red-fleshed crab that was sent to me. It was found in somewhere in the upper Midwest, I forget, Michigan, Wisconsin, I think it was Minnesota maybe, and it has 0 scab. It's absolutely perfect, unblemished fruit. That doesn't mean that it's good in any other way. Right now it's just a puckery red unripe crab apple. Also on this tree is this unmarked branch. Whatever this is, it's definitely a crab derivative. It has these like crab characteristics. Man, what is that? So this apple, whatever it is, it's ripe now, beginning of August. It's not going to improve from here. I mean, this one's just slightly underripe, but I'm talking like a couple of days. It's definitely crab derivative. I can taste it. It has some of the same flavor profile that you find in the best crab apples. It's relatively sweet right now. It's pretty sweet, like sweet enough. Coarse, somewhat crisp flesh. There's a peculiar flavor in there that tastes like another fruit, and it's really weird. It's almost like, I keep wanting to think watermelon rind, but I can't place it. But when I figure out what it is, I'm going to be like, oh yeah, of course, you know, because it's real distinctive. I'd say even that it has some of the characteristics of Bite Me. It's definitely not. But if someone said, there's no label on it, so I don't know what it is, but if someone came to me and said, oh, that's one of your seedlings and you just forgot to label it, I would be like, oh yeah, well that explains it, because it tastes like a Wickson seedling, and I really haven't been able to puzzle out what it is or who sent it to me or what else I got in that batch of apples, because I have like several other apples grafted on. I do remember taking off some seedlings. No, yeah, So there were a couple seedlings like right on this tree. There was a tree right there where that huge squash patch and melon patch is, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a second. And that tree had a bunch of stuff grafted on it. It was broken and messed up by a bear. Anyway, one of the branches on there that was broken, or that I tried to save, was a Wickson seedling that I had planted early on. It was one of, like, I think 5 Wickson seedlings that I planted originally, open pollinated. So it's possible that that's what this is, and that would explain why it tastes like a Wickson seedling, and something that I wouldn't expect to find. I mean, just the size, like it's kind of this in-between size and everything makes me think that. So yeah, I mean, I'd be almost surprised if this wasn't a Wickson seedling, and then I would even go further and say that there's a good chance it's pollinated with the same thing that Bite Me's pollinated with, because there's just too much in common there. Man, what is that flavor? It's kind of like I need to make a massive list of every fruit I can think of and then go through them and figure out what this tastes like. It's something a little bit odd. There it is. There's three apples left on there. I'll eat over the next few days. In fact, I think I'll pick one right now and put it in the refrigerator for maybe up to a week to see how it develops in there, because I have a feeling it might develop a little bit more flavor and character. So in earlier videos, I showed this huge pit. It was 10 feet wide, 3 feet deep, backfilled with food waste and charcoal and other junk, old weeds, dead animals, and stuff like that. This year I planted a big crop of melons on here and a couple squash. There's a butternut over there, or sorry, a buttercup, the giant zucchini, the Costata romanesca, and then there's some volunteers in here like peppers and tomatoes and stuff. As you can see, this is thriving. Now, I remember someone left a comment saying that someone had buried a bunch of like organic matter and straw and stuff like deep in a pit, and that they dug it up later and it wasn't broken down healthily, like it was just like an aerobic slimy mess down there. This is just disgusting down there. If you dug into this and got way down in there, it's just going to be really gross and disgusting, and yeah, anaerobic and slimy and smelly. The real question is, do plants like it? And they clearly like it. The only reason this isn't looking more healthy and thriving more is because I haven't kept up with watering. I just watered it last night and it really perked up because it was starting to get dry and some of the leaves were crinkling and stuff like that. That's what matters. Do the plants like it? Are the plants going to grow? And this is such a huge deposit of nutrition. I mean, it's just like crazy. I could probably grow squash and melon crops on this and corn and stuff for years without, you know, depleting that amazing richness down there. But the main goal is to get a tree here that is going to be a Bite Me tree. This is going to be my one full-size Bite Me tree. And I think that in the future, I will probably be taking the very best seedlings that I have, that I grow, and grafting them on as main branches to that once it gets going. I think this is some type of a honeydew melon right here. And then the rest of the melons are all the melon I've showed before, which is Haugen. There's nothing close to ripe. There's some green ones down in there. So anyway, if I keep up with watering, these pits offer an opportunity to crop a lot of stuff and grow a lot of stuff for a few years while the tree's getting established. But, you know, in my climate, that means keeping up with watering, because I don't want that stuff over competing with the tree. As far as nutrition goes, you know, no problem. There's plenty of nutrition in there, especially for a tree. If anything, you know, it's probably going to help to get all these roots down there, you know, actively. And also it forms a mulch, which keeps the soil cool and all that stuff. And this thing also is just full of redworms, like crazy amounts of redworms. I did not put a single redworm in here. You know, I didn't seed any, I didn't add any compost that already had redworms or redworm eggs. They found it and they multiplied incredibly fast. Like, I was just really surprised at how fast they multiplied. Let's dig in there. And yeah, look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. You can't even count them. Crazy amounts of redworms. And redworms are the ones that, you know, break down compost and rotting stuff. The big fat earthworms, you know, they crawl around in the earth and they come up and they pull down organic matter and stuff. But the redworms are the ones that they're called manure worms, red wigglers. They're in that rotting stuff, just eating. That's what they like. If there's something slimy and anaerobic and rotten, that's where they're at. So here's a great example of a great apple that gets scab really bad, which is Lady Williams. It's, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5, it's a 5, along with Bite Me. You can see just how bad it is. Like in a year where it doesn't set much, you just don't even get a crop, especially if it's a bad scab year like this year. So a lot of these I pollinated with something. Here, this one's pollinated with pink parfait, etc. You know, I'll be lucky if these even make it to maturity since they ripen so late. And, you know, like this one that's cracked probably isn't going to make it. And if you survey other apples on this tree, it's real obvious which ones get scabbed the worst. I would say at a scale of 1 to 5, this is Waltana, it's probably a 4. Now this is one of the fruit bags I've tested, and this is the one I like the best, except that it's breaking down in the sun. And I've already have ones that have holes in them and are all decayed because the sun's tearing them up so bad. This is a red-fleshed apple called Pendragon, and I don't know when it's ripe. I suspect that it may be close to ripe or even ripe right now. Let me smell it. It doesn't smell like anything yet, so I'm probably, since I only have 3 of these left, the birds got on them right away. I'm going to just wait on that and probably wait till one of them falls off the tree. This is the first year I fruited this. It's a real wimpy grower. This is an apple called sometimes American Golden Russet, which is super confusing because the Golden Russet, the famous Golden Russet of America, is different. And this is also known as Bullock's Pippin. If that's what this actually is, there's really no scab on these. And I don't remember how much I went through here and picked off scab-prone apples. But if even with this heavy crop, if these were super scab-prone, if they were like a 4 or a 5, they would definitely, there'd be some on here with scabs. So it looks like this one's pretty good with the scab. I've been waiting for years and years and years to taste this apple because I like Golden Russet so much, and I want to see, you know, how this compares and all of that. So I think it's better to call this Bullock's Pippin. And in the seedling rows, there's lots of interesting stuff out here this year. And this one in particular I'm interested in. It seems to be very scab resistant. I don't know what the parents are. One of them's grenadine. And this one had almost no scab on it. And it was actually had a lot of apples. I thinned it heavily. You can see it's all bent over. I really need to trellis these trees up. But there's all kinds of stuff out here. I did do a scab survey on the seedlings because that's information that I really, really want. You can see this one here is quite bad. I'd say on the average, they're bad. But there's a lot of medium ones, and there's a surprising amount of resistant ones that are like even, you know, score a number 1, which would be, you know, best. Some interesting looking apples though. It's a real interesting, you know, one with it's kind of flat and has a bunch of russet around the stem well. Reminds me of Allen's Everlasting. I think this one is a cross between Grenadine and Goldrush. Yep. This one looks really nice. It was super productive. It actually bent over and broke because there was so many apples on it and I don't have it trellised. And yeah, these look really good with the scab. You know, I don't think there's any scab on these. And there's a lot of scab in here, and it's a bad scab year. If they're going to get it, you know, this would be the year they get it real bad. Here's a good example. This is a cross of Grenadine and Golden Russet. Very little scab on these. You know, there's some, but not enough to really be a bother. That one has a worm. Kind of bummed that this looks like such a great apple, but it doesn't have russet. There's just a little at the stem well. Here's another one. Same thing, I believe. Yeah, Grenadine Golden Russet. Doesn't have any scab. And another one, also not that bad with the scab. This is not really what I would expect out of this cross, but there you have it. I really need to water in here more. That's on the list for this week, is to get water and fertilizer into these trees. Now here's one we tasted last year, but just a little bit. It's a somewhat promising Rubaiyat Wickson cross. It definitely has red flesh. It does get scab for sure, but it set a lot, and I was able to pick off most of the scab apples and get a pretty decent looking little crop going here. And next to it is a second of the same cross, Rubaiyat Wickson. So there's one with scab there. It looks like this tree is going to turn out to be pretty productive. I actually made some crosses onto it preliminarily, so if I taste this this year and I'm like, wow, that is really impressive, I'll already have made some crosses with what? Question mark, it says, which means that I put the tag on there, pollinated it, but forgot to write whatever I pollinated it with on the tag. And this one is with Williams Pride. And question mark again. Something good though. So here's another interesting seedling. Has some definite grenadine traits. It's definitely a grenadine seedling, but I don't know what the other parent is. It might be an open pollinated, but that's finally producing this year, along with a couple others on this tree. This one here is also a seedling, but it's only producing one apple this year. Hopefully that'll make it through the gauntlet.